Hello and welcome. Hello to everybody. Thanks for joining. We're we're so excited to have everybody trickling in here. So this is great, a great showing. So really excited to see everybody. Um, yeah, it looks like there's still some folks sort of hopping into the waiting room and coming in. So we'll give it just one more minute before we get started here. And yeah, like I said, appreciate everybody joining us this afternoon or morning, wherever you are, evening. Welcome to, I think this is the first day of a week of land system science. So, like I said, really excited to see everybody. Yeah, I'm still seeing people hopping in, so I'll give it just like 20 more seconds. But thanks for joining, everybody. Okay. Well, wonderful. We'll get started here, and yeah, and even as folks hop in, this is going to be a really exciting, well, hopefully exciting session. Exciting for me, hopefully exciting for you all, and very interactive. So, as you come in and get settled, yeah, hopefully there'll be lots of time to sort of join in the variety of discussions that we have set up for you all today. So this is great. Okay, I'm going to go ahead. So hello. So I'm Lindsay Barbieri. I go by Bar, and I'm the science policy lead at the Global Land Program in the International Program Office. And I have the pleasure of helping sort of moderate and guide us through this session, which is the GLP perspectives on opportunities for agricultural landscape and crop diversification to strengthen agricultural production and a variety of other things. We're going to get into all sorts of these discussions during the session. So just as sort of a little overview, a little guide, our session is 75 minutes, so we'll be here for an hour and 15. And we have a lot of, sort of exciting pieces here, like I said, that are going to sort of weave us through a little bit of introducing the topics, and then some gathering of, your views, your expertise, a little bit of discussion, and yeah, and we have sort of, I'll run you through this in more detail in a moment, but really our goals here for this session are to sort of present the context of the Science for Action brief and the brief itself that we've been working on related to crop diversity and then agricultural landscape diversity and diversification. We're going to seek feedback and discussion from you all, from GLP members, from expertise within our community, and really engage you all on sort of next steps for developing these ideas further. So as you can see, I have a little highlighted here. You will have plenty of time and hopefully a lot of energy to sort of participate in our discussions and really lend your expertise to these conversations. So, definitely, and hopefully you are ready for lots of engagement. So quickly, so session introduction, I'm going to just quickly introduce ourselves. So this session is run by so Nick Maglioka, Emily Birchfield, Graham McDonald, and myself. Nick was unfortunately not able to join us today, really unfortunately, but Emily, Graham, and I are really, happy to sort of go ahead and, and steer us through. So, so yeah, like I said, really huge thanks to Nick for really setting this up for us, and we're just happy to take it home. And we also had great expertise by Laura Van Ramensen as well, has given a lot of help and thought in shaping this brief, which I will now introduce the context of. So essentially GLP, we are, as the science policy lead, we've been really working on sort of setting up the structure and the workflow for producing these science for action briefs, which are really intended to sort of synthesize work around a topic in land system science, really galvanized by our expertise and from GLP members, and sort of produce a short sort of brief, sort of aimed at policy or action or for society, sort of a brief overview of the current understanding and sort of the recommendations that are coming out of this topic. And so this brief, the Crop and Landscape Diversification for a Sustainable and Resilient U.S. Agri-Food System, is one of sort of the first, we've had a couple of sort of pilot briefs, and this is one that I've been helping support with Nick, alongside Nick and Emily and Graham. And this brief, this session that we're about to sort of launch into here is really building on the efforts of developing this brief on the topic of agricultural landscape and crop diversity under shifting climate conditions. And so, we're going to explore and expand on the themes related to landscape and crop diversification. We have sort of outlined these in the brief, and we're really excited to expand on them and really deepen and explore these themes in a broader, within our broader community here and with your expertise as well. And then really thinking about, how can we crystallize and think more concretely about pathways to transforming sort of our dominant large-scale commodity production, and getting that not just for the U.S. but also for other regions and other contexts around the world. So this is so part of this session. So thank you so much for being a part of it. We're convening thought leaders in this space, particularly among GLP membership, to better understand our expertise, expand on these sort of arguments and premises that we've brought up, and really aiming towards a perspective article, or thinking about like how we can build on this work and bring it further into different realms of sharing. Just to highlight, we have part of this is thinking about our GLP members. We have over 1,400 members of GLP that have noted that they have either agricultural systems or food systems sort of expertise as a main theme of their own expertise within GLP. So that's like a pretty substantial body of our GLP members. And just for a little side note, one of the really amazing things about our sort of new GLP hub and website, we have, as many of you hopefully know if you've signed up for the hub and are using it now, especially during this week of land system science, is that we have little, our scientific bios, our biographies for within GLP. We were able to actually sort of look through what people were noting in their biographies and summaries as their kind of main focus, or how they sort of introduce their own work. And we have over 50 GLP members that are have agricultural and food systems expertise that are really focused, based on their bios, on transformations as a focus. So transforming the agricultural and food system landscape. And within that, we even have 17 members who specifically reference crop and agricultural diversification as a mainstay of their expertise. Now, of course, we know that there's probably even way more expertise out there on these themes. These were just people that are putting this in their bios and summaries, but I think it really speaks to the fact that this is a topic of expertise that we do have a lot of people sort of focus on. And so we're excited to get a little bit more understanding from you all. And just because I love maps really fast here, we have a little a visual of what this looks like. So these are our members that are really GLP members that have noted their expertise in agricultural and food systems. You can kind of see the array of all the different countries and regions that people are really based in, where they have this expertise. These are, the places in particular where people are focusing on transformations in agricultural systems. We have a really, beautiful geographic spread, lots of different regions focusing on thinking about how we're transforming our agricultural system, and in particular crop and agricultural landscape and crop diversification as part of that are those, the highlighted ones in yellow. So again, just a really wealth of expertise. So we're really excited to sort of bring this forward to the GLP community. So that's a little bit of an introduction of the session, and a little bit of an introduction, hopefully, to you all, and starting to, get to know how we all fit into this landscape of GLP membership. I'll just say briefly to introduce the brief in particular. So we have, like I said, the sort of Science for Action brief on crop and landscape Diversification for a Sustainable and Resilient U.S. Agri-Food System. We will say that for this brief, we were really focused on the U.S. for a variety of reasons, but in terms of like actually having an audience, a policy audience that we were aiming for, we've been in talks with some folks at the U.S. Department of Agriculture, for example, in sort of thinking about, as we're developing this brief, the types of information that might be helpful for guiding funding or research priorities and shaping a little bit of that policy landscape. So we were really focused on the U.S. agri-food system, and there's some other other reasons as well why I think this is important. However, for this session, while we will welcome any thoughts on sort of deepening our understanding of the U.S. agri-food system, we also are really welcoming of thinking about other regions and other contexts as well. We're thinking about this a little bit more broadly for the session. But for the brief, it was just focused on the U.S. agricultural agri-food system. With this, our summary here was really thinking about how there are and will be and will continue to be these sort of significant shifts in biophysical suitability of crop growing conditions due to changing climate and environmental conditions. And while climate and environmental change do pose challenges and significant challenges to our current U.S. agricultural production, that these changes also at the same time present opportunities to do things like diversify the crops that are being produced and diversify the landscapes that support them in ways to really bolster resilience to future shocks and stressors. And not just environmental, but thinking about sort of how this opportunity to diversify crops and landscapes might also help bolster our resilience to other shocks, and sort of shift, not just environmental, but also social. So with that, our main premises, we sort of had 4 key sections that we were sort of posing in this brief. So we were looking, firstly at the climate shifts and how climate shifts are influencing growing conditions and how that shapes which crops are grown and where. And this can, partially be mitigated by agricultural management decisions. So any sort of negative impacts of climate shifts in growing conditions can be mitigated, maybe partially by agricultural management decisions. But then our, second premise is that diversification within fields and between fields are opportunities to build more resilient landscapes. Our third, diversification can also strengthen the U.S. And then, for our purposes of the session, U.S. and other regional domestic food supply and local food production. And the fourth is that the scope for adaptation through on-farm management is significantly constrained by political and structural economic forces. And then we have some recommendations. So the way that this session is going to work, and then we'll hop right into it. So essentially, for each of these premises, we have our amazing experts. We have Emily and Graham on the line, and they're going to give us a little bit of a deeper look at each of these premises. And then what we're going to do is, first we'll have sort of 3 kind of bundled together. And that's, Emily and Graham will sort of introduce all 3 of these together. So we'll listen a little bit to that. And then at the end of those 3, we're going to flip to a mural board. And this is where we're going to be able to sort of gather some of the, some of your feedback on what you're hearing. And that feedback could be anything from like additional examples, how this looks in your own regional context, if it does, maybe things in agreement, maybe things, tensions or conflicts or things you don't agree with that we've sort of presented on, or maybe don't look the same in our contexts. And most importantly, we have a whole section that we would love to gather in, others, either citations of or work, links to work that you think is really important in these areas, other expertise. You can always just, put your own name down if you want to think more about these sorts of topics and note that. So we'll have ways for you to do that in the mural board. And I'll go into that in a little bit more detail once Emily and Graham present and we're ready to flip over to the mural board. I'll give a little intro to that. But I think with that, yep, and then we'll do that again for the fourth premise and then for the recommendations as well. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and skip this slide for now, just go straight on to Emily, and then we'll come back to this map of ideas idea after. So go ahead. Yeah, Emily.
Cool. Thanks, Bar. Hey guys, I'm Emily. I work at Emory University down in Atlanta, Georgia, and a lot of the work I'm doing right now is trying to think about this tricky question of how we anticipate how agricultural land use will change in the future. Um, One kind of our first premise in this brief is that of course climate shapes where we grow major crops, right? Agriculture is, fundamentally defined by sun, soil, and water. But, Bar, if you could click for me. The cool stuff that makes ag is all the messy people stuff, right? Like it's farm level management, technology, political economic incentives, household constraints, the list goes on. This is what makes agriculture agriculture, right? Like it's humans pushing back against sun, soil, and water to shift cultivation geographies. And so as we look to the future, it's really, really hard to anticipate how agricultural land use will change because it's not just climate, right, that's shaping agricultural realities. It's all this messy people stuff. And so there are many, many projects. I know several of you, many of you on the call are involved in projects that are trying to explore this question. So I'm really glad you're here. I'm just going to present a couple of results from a project I'm leading in the United States that's trying to look at how agricultural land use will change over the next 20 or 30 years. And we're experimenting with creative ways to quantify the messy people stuff. So I can talk more about that in the Q&A. It's not the focus of this talk at all. But so I'm about to show just a couple of results to kind of contextualize the importance of climate in driving agricultural land use, but also the importance of the messy people stuff. So some quant results to illustrate this. But again, this is just from one project, and there are many other examples to demonstrate this. So Bar, can you do next? In our project, we're looking at the United States. We're looking at a part of the United States that's a little simpler than the Western United States, where irrigation just makes things very complicated. So Central and Eastern US. And our puzzle is trying to predict where major crops are grown with a whole bunch of different predictors. We've got something like 90 different predictors we're looking at, and we're trying to see which different combinations of predictors are most important in determining where things have grown historically for this part of the United States. I'm providing that, so these are historical suitability maps. This just shows you the likelihood of different crops in different areas based on the last 30 years of data. Next bar. I'm giving you this context because I wanted to show you this plot, these two plots that I think are really interesting. And I think Lokendra Rathore, who's the postdoc that came up with this really good idea, is on this call. So shout out to Lokendra. This is SHAP important. So this is a way of kind of like clumping the ways that different variables matter in predicting where different crops are grown. So you can think about like the thickness of the bar as kind of indicating how important these types of variables are in predicting historically where a crop has been grown. And so you'll see, for example, for corn and soy, inputs in purple is extremely important in determining where these crops are grown. Also for pasture, it's kind of interesting. This is an inverse relationship where really low levels of input use is highly predictive of pasture. The right-hand bar plot is the same thing where we've created even coarser categories for the original set of like 90 predictors in this model. Just to show you how, like, yeah, climate in blue is really important in predicting where major crops are grown, but the messy people stuff is really important too. I think this is intuitive in people understanding ag systems, right? But in case you didn't want to just take that for granted, here's some quantitative evidence. Next slide. So, what we've been doing in this project is trying to see how, as climate and all this messy people stuff moves in the future, we're using a combination of Delphi surveys and a lot of farmer engagement on the ground. We can create stakeholder informed scenarios for the messy people stuff and try and anticipate how climate might shift crop likelihood in the future. We're one project of many looking at this question, but the synthesis kind of across this community thinking about agricultural land use change is that big changes are coming. Climate alone is going to drive big changes in where and how we cultivate major crops over the next 50 years. And so, the question we've been thinking about with this brief is, okay, well, how do we move the messy people stuff to prepare for these big changes? Next.
Great. Hello, everyone. My name is Graham McDonald. I'm at McGill University in Montreal, Canada. And I'm going to take off, yeah, with that messy people stuff idea that Emily introduced. And, that's so important when we think about diversification of agricultural systems and crop diversity, the social, political, and economic aspects. And so our second premise then is thinking about diversification at different levels. So within fields, here, I think we really mean crop species, so introducing crop species or reintroducing crop species spatially on the landscape or temporally in a sequence or rotation. Maybe we could think about more broadly as well, but right now I think we're kind of constraining to that in this brief. Also between fields, so thinking about the diversity of different land covers, also the diversity of non-agricultural species in our agricultural landscapes, and how these can be really important in building resilience in agricultural landscapes and also more broadly in the food system. And if you please click. So, borrowing from Emily's idea of thinking about the about this as a function of different components of diversity. We could think about agri-food system resilience then as being a function in some ways of crop diversity, landscape diversity, and broader food system diversity, and then how diversification can enhance that. And so it's obviously really important to define what we mean by resilience. So, here I think we're thinking about resilience being the agri-food system, production, distribution, and consumption aspects, including food security, being able to withstand different types of disturbances and shocks, especially under climate change, and maintain their basic structure, function, and identity. If you please click. So I want to give a little example of how we can look at crop diversity in the US context. Emily and several others on this call have demonstrated this with these types of data that I'm going to show, and I'll show a little example of a project that we recently published. You'll also see the concept of landscape diversity, so this kind of cover diversity and non-agricultural diversity within our agricultural landscapes implicitly in this. So if you please click. Okay, so I'm going to show a little video of the U.S. Department of Agricultural's crop sequence boundary data set. If you click to start. So it's a national data set with millions of individual crop fields across the entire US in each year. So we can actually look at the cropping histories. Here I'm zooming in on Iowa. So you can see gold color, that's corn. You can see green, that's soybean. So, this is the Corn Belt, really homogeneous, like very dominated by those crops. But when we zoom right in, you can see different colors. You can see these pinks and purples and burgundies and reds and blues. They're small, some bright green, but they're there. We're going up along the Mississippi River here, and you can see those little tiny pockets of like crops like sorghum, rye, alfalfa, sugar beets, dry beans, peas. I even found peaches. So this is definitely a homogeneous, very homogeneous landscape, but there is diversity inside of that. And so that's what we thought about in the next slide in this project that we're emphasizing it as maybe one of the box examples in this policy brief. This is work that was led by Camille Bouvet-Beauclair. It was her master's thesis. And she took this crop sequence boundary data set from the USDA and calculated spatial diversity and temporal diversity using Shannon entropy. And it's expressed as the effective number of species. So you're seeing on this bivariate legend here, on the bottom, you see spatial diversity. So these are quartiles of increasing spatial diversity. On the vertical, you're seeing temporal diversity. So these are quartiles of increasing temporal diversity. So down in the lower part of the quadrant, you can see those kind of pale gray and blue and yellow colors. That's a lot of what we saw in Iowa. So, relatively low diversity in an absolute sense, and also kind of in the US context. However, there were little pockets, and that's what we saw. There were little pockets of those blues and gold colors and greens. And we were thinking, well, what if we could draw on that? And so, draw on that and actually increase and think about how we could draw on the crops that farmers are already growing and think about the hypothetical potential to increase crop diversity. So that's what we did with this simple rule-based model. We looked at the crops grown in different broad agroecological zones, so places with broadly similar soil and climate characteristics. And we raised diversity to hypothetical targets where we were saying, well, let's bring up all those places to the kind of a certain threshold of diversity that's already observed in those regions. Okay, if you please click next. So this is the result. So what you saw is that jump from those kind of grayer colors to more of this green. So we can see like that place that we looked at in the eastern part of Iowa along the Mississippi River. You can see it's kind of jumped up a couple steps. It's jumped from those pale greens to those darker greens. So what we've done is we've seen how just drawing on the crops that farmers are already growing in that region, we can actually think about how much potential there could be to increase diversity. If you please click. So, what we did in this scenario is a 75th percentile scenario. So raise everyone to raise every a part of that to the 75th percentile observed diversity. It switched about 3% of the crop fields and 12% of the crop area, but it raised diversity by about 50% nationally. If you please click. And so these are just the simulated switches you're seeing in that. So going from the current kind of 2022 baseline that we looked at in the paper to the attainable diversity scenario. So we can see that the switches that happened in the model, like soybeans switching to vegetables, other rare cereals, we can see corn switching to wheat and sometimes even fruit and tree crops. If you please click next. So that was our second premise. Our third premise is thinking about, well, in that diversification, then how would that affect the food system? And, we were thinking particularly in the US context, how it could be really important in enhancing the US food supply in terms of nutritional production, food security, local food systems, and self-sufficiency potential. So this is where we're really thinking about food system diversity then as this component that's beyond fields. So thinking about the diversity in the supply chain pathways, building that resilience through that diversity, and also the provision of food more locally and the nutritional benefits that could come from diversification. Next.
Okay, I think that's back to me. So this is where, we keep saying that this is our first week of land system science that we're having all virtual here at GLP. So we're so excited. It's a little experimental, and this is also a little experimental. So we have a mural board, and I believe Riley has been posting the link in the chat. I think I tried to remove the permissions to log in, but you might have to just note your email address and get a login there. But we should be able to now see our mural board. So I'm going to walk us through this a little bit. And so how we're using this right now. So firstly, are you all able to see the mural board on my screen right now? So you can that's great. Okay. So I'm going to show you. I see some names flying around. This is great. So essentially the main like button that might be helpful is over here in the corner. There's a little arrow. That's the select arrow, and you can click it to select something and then off click it if you want to just move around without clicking on anything. So that's going to be basically the only tool you'll need in the toolbox is that arrow. So once you're moving around, we do have this little like how to use banner at the top. But what we're doing right now is down here in our first section, we have our first mural. That's the premises 1 through 3 that you just heard from Emily and Graham. So if we zoom in here, we can see each of the 3 premises. Hopefully you can see it all in the window here, and you can sort of zoom in and out. But this whole bundle of premises was really us thinking, diversification as management strategy to boost agroecosystem sort of food resilience. And you heard this about, what climate shifts are doing, thinking about diversification within fields and between fields as opportunities, and thinking about how diversification can actually help strengthen food supply, strengthen local food systems. So these are our 3 premises in this mural board. And so what you're going to do is if you come up here, you'll see these little sticky notes. And you can see, we have them in 4 categories. We have agree, evidence, these are green sticky notes. You should be able to go on and click one of the sticky notes. And actually, if you double click, you can start to type in anything you want. And so this is where you might type in if you have an agreement, some evidence related to these points. You want to be able to like say like, oh, I have a note. I'd love for you guys to consider this if you haven't. We have our challenges. So things maybe you don't agree with, or maybe things we need to consider that, we haven't considered yet, or maybe you didn't hear them and think it's really important. We have questions in purple. And then over here, the very important sort of citations or other expertise. If you have, a paper you're thinking about that really emphasizes this really well, if you're working on a project that you want to, make sure that we're noting, if you want to have more of an in-depth conversation about this, you can grab these sticky notes here. So you should be able to, hopefully, grab one of these sticky notes, type in, and then move it down to our first mural board of, underneath these three premises of, under this bucket of diversification as management strategy to boost agro ecosystems. And it looks like people are moving stuff around. We are going to let this, let yourselves go for another probably about 8 minutes here. So you do have some time. If you would like to sort of, think about each of these categories, especially like I said, if you have thoughts and you're like, it's really hard to type it in the sticky note and I'm feeling a little overwhelmed, feel free to just write your name in the sticky note and we can follow up if you have things that you would want to add to this brief or to our future perspectives paper. And it does look like some folks are able to move around some sticky notes down here. If you're having any issues, definitely let us know and I can try to troubleshoot. Like I said, experimental, a little bit of an experimental way to get people interacting here, but gonna. Yeah, you should just be able to snag those sticky notes and move them to the boxes that you want to write your note in. And I'll leave this up. And I don't know, Graham and Emily, as this is happening, should we give everybody a couple minutes of sort of quiet to focus, or do you want to take any questions? Or maybe we'll give, I'm gonna put a timer on and we're gonna be quiet for 2 minutes so people can really think and write, and then that can continue to happen and we can also open up for questions. So if you do have questions or thoughts, keep them in your head and we'll get back to them in 2 minutes. So please go ahead. I'm seeing lots of notes on here already, so this is great. Okay. We've made it about almost a minute and a half. I do see people are still writing and I want people to continue to add the sticky notes. And like I said, really, feel free to grab any. And if you're having trouble figuring out exactly which one to grab, just feel free to write a note in any color, place it on this first mural board down here. And we can always sort of follow up But while this is happening, we are going to let this go for another, 2 minutes or 2 to 3 minutes or so. But now I think if there are questions, and Emily, great point in the chat, we do know that there's, like I said, a wealth of expertise here from GLP. So we don't have to be, the questions can be directed at anybody. But if anybody does have anything they do want to sort of ask, yeah, I'm inviting more conversation now as well. Well, okay. Then I mean, so what's great about this exercise is that, as you can see, so this is a great, great by way of introduction. It looks like a lot of people figured out how to grab stickies, place them on this first mural board. You can kind of see on the whole board that we have, right next to it is going to be our second mural, and that's going to be for premise 4. So just a sneak peek, but don't start yet, because we're going to have Emily give us a little introduction on that one. But basically, for the remainder of this time, we're going to go forward, talk a little bit about our fourth premise, gather information from you all in much the same way, so you can continue to work on um, as much as you want. And actually, I just had a note in the chat, somebody was asking, would it be possible to keep this board alive even past this meeting? And of course, yeah, we can keep this open and keep gathering information as well. So please, yeah, do save this link. We'll also have a follow-up email, and we can keep sort of gathering information here. But for now, I'll flip back to our slides so we can hear about our fourth premise, and then we'll come back and you can, continue to add notes to either. And then just as a sneak peek below, we have, a whole recommendation section that we really want to get to, because I bet you all have some great ideas there. So with that, I'll flip back to here. And hopefully you can all see my screen has shifted with me. So are we looking at your slides, Emily?
Yeah, except there's a really good question in the chat for
Oh, yeah.
Graham. So maybe we want to do
Oh,
that
yeah. Let's
first.
do that first. Yeah.
Great.
Um,
Well, thanks so much, Melody. And it's great to see someone from AAFC, Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada here, which is the kind of Canadian equivalent of the USDA. It's about the crop sequence boundary data set. Actually, I'm sure others on this call might know even more about this than I do, but it's really a remotely sensed. Um, it's a remote sensing data product, a crop classification, but I think it has a lot of validation and kind of verification that's happened using different survey and census data. In Canada, we're working on somewhat similar data sets, and I know your colleagues at AFC are really have produced excellent crop classifications in Canada that are gridded and are also looking at those in field boundaries. So slightly different data available in Canada, but yeah. So I hope that answers your question.
I just shared Tyler's paper, since I think he's still on this call, that talks about some of the data quality issues with this CDL. There's definitely misclassification. Like, this is one of the challenges in understanding diversity, right? Like, we're very good at seeing dominant crops. We're very good at quantifying the production of dominant crops. It's really hard to see stuff in the fringes of agriculture, and so it can be really hard to track and understand diversification reliably, because as we move out into crops that are more difficult to see either through federal US data or through remotely sensed imagery, grown in smaller fields with more complicated cultivation patterns to detect than like corn, soy, and wheat, the error changes. And so it's a scientific challenge, I think, in thinking about diversification. But Tyler, I don't want to put you on the spot, but like, since you know a whole lot about this, since you're on this call, I don't know if you're still on this call. I think you are.
I am. I'm
Maybe you
just
don't.
tuning in from my phone though, so I'm not able
Oh,
to
sorry,
throw a bunch
man.
of thoughts in the chat. But what Graham said and what you Oh, so they're absolutely right. Yeah, it's mostly derived from that satellite drive data, and then but it's validated against a lot of farmer reported stuff that the USDA collects.
And it's got issues, basically, is the
Yeah.
takeaway.
Yep.
It's got lots
It's
of
got
issues.
errors
Yeah.
like everything else. That's great to
Yep.
quantify and incorporate and consider.
Yeah. Cool. So let's move on to this next sort of suite of premises, and then we can get another round of feedback from you guys. Um, Anybody working in agri-food systems knows this next piece, but it's very dangerous to point the finger exclusively at farmers and ask them to make change. I think one of the comments I saw on the mural board was just about how hard it is to manage a diverse operation. I also saw a comment about lock-in in regional supply chains, and so we'd really like to get some more thoughts and comments on the sort of off-farm factors that constrain, that limit, or could potentially help to grow diversification. And so again, one of the things we're really working on developing is a better understanding of how political and structural economic forces really constrain diversification. This is the messy people stuff. It's everything from just capitalism and incentivizing certain modes of production to US federal policy strongly incentivizing and prioritizing a few crops. And so you can see the bullet points kind of outline that in many current agri-food value chains, they really prioritize efficiency and low-cost production. This drives food systems producers towards larger farms, land consolidation, of course, crop homogenization, and more broadly simplified agricultural landscapes. This is like the overwhelming trend we're seeing in the United States over the last century, with Iowa in particular being one of the most kind of like radical cases of landscape simplification on Earth over the last century. In the US, and we can talk more about this, there are many federal policies from crop insurance to just sort of subsidies to production that really incentivize a few crops and disincentivize the management of diverse operations or the whole suite of specialty crops that includes fruit and vegetables. One of the things we're seeing in the project I presented earlier that just feels increasingly critical is farmers who do want to diversify, who have a sense of, say, cotton not really being an economically viable crop in their region in the future, and who are looking for other options, often are blocked, not only because of the expensive on-farm infrastructure and equipment they need to invest in to cultivate that crop, but also because the regional infrastructure from like, literal silos or distribution centers, processing facilities simply doesn't exist in their region to incentivize or sort of provide capacity for cultivating different crops. And this extends, of course, also just to market access. A lot of the growers we're working with in Georgia, where I live, are desperately trying to pivot away from cotton, and there's simply not a lot of other options because the markets aren't as well developed as they are in the Midwestern United States. And again, these regional infrastructures aren't in place. This is investment that has to happen off farm, right? Like these are, to a certain extent, farmers can have a little bit of control over this, but these regional shifts are really out of farmers' control. And so it's something it'd be great to talk about with this community and get some feedback on. Of course, and I think people use this exact language in some of the comments, but in the US, there's absolutely structural lock-in in our commodity-based input intensive production systems, particularly in the Corn Belt. And as we think about future resilience, I think it's increasingly critical to think about ways in which we can give farmers more options. The sort of big changes in tariffs are one example over the last year of farmers just kind of being subject to huge shifts in political economy, and it's profoundly disruptive. We're seeing record levels of farm bankruptcy. And so I think this is a critical role for diversification, right? Is not just on-farm diversification and all the benefits we know it brings both to production, but also to ecosystem services and food systems, as Graham pointed out, but also the benefits it can potentially bring in terms of farm livelihood and capacities to produce food at a larger regional scale without creating commodity collapse. Next, I think there's another mural already, right? There you go. So you can react to that rant and let me know what you think.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Emily. So yeah, I flipped my screen now, but it looks like everybody's still on here. Now you can see on the second mural, so premise 4, if I zoom in here right next door to the first one you were just looking at, It's this idea of, Emily just gave us a lot of these potential challenges to diversification, thinking about, what constrains these decisions, where are the challenges and the tensions here by political and economic forces, and maybe all their environmental forces as well. So similarly to the last one, we want to hear from you about whether or not this resonates. Other challenges that you might see, like what are some other examples that we didn't touch on, or maybe some counter evidence or tensions with what we just said, like maybe you're seeing actually some positives, or we're happy to hear the suite of experiences, and importantly, again, thinking about your own regional context as well. If your regional context is not the US, or if it is, I'm happy to hear a little bit about what's missing and whether or not this resonates. So this is, again, just right next door, this mural board here, premise 4. Same thing, you can grab the sticky notes from above, particularly, again, if you have, the green is sort of this, additional evidence or agreement, we're talking about this sort of challenges to diversification in terms of the structural challenges. If you have others that you want to put up on the board, that would be great. Like I said, the red's the challenges. If you have any questions or just sort of thoughts, want to give us some other things to think about. And the yellow, all importantly here, is like citations, other expertise. If you are working on issues related to this, if you think there's some great things to take a look at here, please note that as well. And like last time, and you can still work on the first board too, but like last time, I think we'll give it, I'll stop talking so you can think more. We'll give it like another 2 minutes of sort of quiet, but also feel free to put, I loved the chat, putting the questions in the chat as well, so we can kind of respond to that in 2 minutes. But we'll give everybody, 2 minutes to kind of add some extra things to this mural collection. Okay. I'll be back in 2. Okay, spend 2 minutes. I still see a lot of activity on the board, so please keep writing your ideas. And again, if you're, having trouble fitting everything or really capturing what you want to say in the sticky notes, really do feel free to just drop a note in with your name, and we can, on a section if you want to be followed up with, because just emphasizing that the point of the session is to start to gather these thoughts and other expertise, and then we'll definitely be thinking about using this all and reaching back out to all of you as experts, as Emily said, as we continue to push on these topics sort of going forward and think about what we're doing in the future here. So please, looks like we're getting some great um, comments here. So throughout this whole presentation, of course, you can keep adding to this first mural board or now the second mural board. But I do want to make sure we give enough time for some of our recommendations and sort of map ideas as well. So I'm going to shift us to that in 1 second. But if there's any questions or thoughts on these first 4 premises, so you've just heard, Graham and Emily present on sort of our premises, the first 3 on sort of diversification as a management strategy to boost, agro-ecosystem food resilience. We've heard about some challenges to diversification. These are sort of our premises that we are really trying to highlight in this brief. If there's any questions on these first or on what Graham and Emily presented, I'll give a minute for that. And yeah, feel free to keep adding your comments on the mural boards. Okay. I don't see no questions in the chat, right? I don't see anything, I think, new yet. Great. Then I'm going to go ahead and actually, what fun. We actually get to stay right on the mural boards, but I want to give this a little bit of a premise and an introduction because part of the Science for Action brief that, Nick and Emily and Graham have really been instrumental in sort of leading and shaping was really keeping, our premises really tight and well sort of described and well backed up with with current research in the US in particular. But one of our main focuses was not just in sort of outlining these premises and demonstrating, why diversification might be really important and really good for resilience and also the challenges to it. But then we really focused on thinking about, recommendations, where does this leave us? How can we do better in terms of encouraging diversification and supporting these sorts of strategies? So we have some recommendations, but before we show you ours, we would love to gather from you all some thoughts, before we even give, seed it with ours. So we have it from various scales. We have, some farm scale recommendations, maybe some more, landscape or regional scale recommendations. Of course, focusing on national level recommendations might be important for some of these, structural lock-in questions and policy questions. That was mostly our focus within the brief, especially because we were in the US context, was really only, thinking primarily all the way up to the national context. However, now that we're thinking broader and thinking, okay, this could be, not just the US context, everybody here is maybe working in different regional and national contexts, is we'd also love to hear, are you thinking about recommendations or thoughts about how to increase diversification or support agricultural diversification at multinational scales, at global scales, and also if there are other considerations. So for this mural board, we're not moving around the sticky notes. The sticky notes are there in our scales, and you can just type in your recommendations at whatever scale you want. However, if there are, if it's not, you're like, I have something to say and it doesn't really fit into these scales, you can just drag your sticky note over to the recommendations sort of pathway section to the left here. And I'll even get onto the board here. You can see this. So now that we're on the mural board, you still have these two murals up here. You can still add to these to sort of helping us deepen and broaden our premises. But now if you go all the way down, we have our recommendation section. And like I said, we have our farm scale, our regional scale, national, multinational, global, and just other considerations. But if you feel like you want to put it somewhere totally different, you can put a sticky note over here on the recommendations and pathways if it doesn't, fit in our scales. Again, for this one, no need to move the sticky notes. You can just type right in. And much like the other the other murals, feel free to type some key notes or as much as you want in the sticky note. But if you feel like what you have to say is a little too complicated or big for the sticky note, feel free to write your name, and we can follow up with, like, we'll know that you have a good recommendation or a good thought for these scales. Yeah, Emily, Graham, anything to add before and we'll give it a couple minutes here in recommendations, and then we will flip back and share what we had as recommendations and see, how things resonate. And yeah, we'll leave this open. So I'll go ahead and give this, like I said, sort of 2 minutes so people can think without being spoken at, and then we'll come back and share some of our recommendations, and then also continue to fill out this and discuss them a little bit more in detail. Okay. Be back in 2 minutes. And again, just a note, if you're struggling a little bit with the mural board but have questions or thoughts, feel free to pop it also in the chat of the Zoom, because we can address those as we go and make sure to capture those. So do feel free to share thoughts there as well.